Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight to celebrate Johnny Compton and the release of The Spite House. Johnny Compton's short stories have appeared in Pseudopod, Strange Horizon, the No Sleep Podcast, and many other markets. He is an HWA member and operates the podcast Healthy Fears, which covers how our fears are explored through horror fiction. The Spite House, his debut novel, is a terrifying gothic thriller about grief and death and the depths of a father's love. It has also been described as I gotta say this correctly, the Babadook meets a head full of ghosts in a Texas hill country. Without further ado, let's give a nice round of applause for Johnny!
Thanks, Nick. I'm a tall guy. Can I just take the mic up like this? Oh, perfect. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming out. My name is Johnny Compton, as Nick introduced me, and I'm a Texas-based author living in San Antonio since 1994. And so my story, I preface with that because my story is based in the Texas Hill Country. And that is an area of Texas that I think a lot of people are unfamiliar with, generally speaking, if you haven't been to Texas, or even if you have been to Texas, even if you've lived in Texas like I have since 1994, almost 20 years, but that is actually almost 30 years, isn't it? I'm old. So it's an area I was not as familiar with at an earlier portion of my time in Texas, and as I got more familiar with it, I just was really interested in that, and several different things about this story converged, so that contributes to the setting. And just as Nick indicated, it's a haunted house story. It's a very much haunted house indeed. It's not one of those situations where you're reading the book and you're wondering, is this indeed haunted? And maybe not. The ghosts appear pretty early on and are very apparent. And I do at the same time try to channel as much as I can, as much as anyone really can, Shirley Jackson, which is kind of an impossible task. But my opening paragraph even of the book is my best attempt to capture the haunting of Hill House. That classic opening where she indicates one of my favorite lines in all of fiction, Hill House not, just those 4 words, Hill House not sane. I remember the first time reading that thinking, oh, this is amazing. This house is alive and it's also not sane. That is extra terrifying. That would be beyond your typical haunting even. We're not just worry about the ghost, it's the house itself that is not sane. So try to convey that in my story as well, an element of the house being alive and being a threat in the Spite House. So I'm going to kind of ask myself some of my own questions to get things going up. This is the last leg of my tour that Tour Night Fire has been wonderful enough to send me on. It's my first time in San Diego. I'm disappointed I'm not going to be able to actually do much here. I rode the train in, got in about 3:30, did some walking around in Old Town. I liked it already. And then I fly out at 10 in the morning. I know. Back to San Antonio. And I've been on the road. I miss home. But at the same time, if you're going to be in a place, I'd rather be here. And I can't complain. I'm not complaining. Obviously, Tour they're not sending me on vacation. So it's understandable. But I do wish I could spend more time here. Glad that you guys came out. From everything I've seen, it just seems like it's a wonderful area. And I'm curious because I found this out. Yesterday I was in Pasadena, and so somebody there, I know I'm not supposed to ask questions early, but I just kind of do my own thing. And I'm gonna ask my own questions, but I'm just gonna pitch this to the group. Do you guys have a Spite House? Are you aware of what a Spite House is? And if you are, do you have your own Spite House in town? Because I found out Pasadena has a Spite House, which I was fascinated by. No? I'm seeing some heads shaking no. Okay. So I'm going to tell you what a Spite House is. Most people don't know. I was surprised in a very positive way yesterday. A gentleman was like, oh, yeah, we have a Pasadena Spite House. And their Spite House very much matched the kind of Spite House I wrote about. So how the story came about. How did this story come about? This is my question I'm going to ask myself. Johnny, how did you come up with this? So I already had some ghost story ideas. I wanted to write a haunted house story. I've loved horror fiction since I was very young. And then I read an article about Spite Houses, and I was fascinated. So what is a spite house? As the name would imply, it is a house built primarily to spite someone, as opposed to being built to, be a traditional residence and be a shelter and a place for you to raise your kids in, or live with your partner, or live alone if you prefer that, and just be warm and welcoming and be home and be safe. Instead, you're building this out of animosity for whatever reason. There was an example of one that was making the rounds on social media, similar to the one as described to me that existed in Pasadena. I didn't get to stay in Pasadena long enough to go check that out either. I was like, oh, this is fascinating. But there was an example of one that went kind of viral, semi-viral, online briefly, a few months ago, I think. And I think it was based in Beirut, I want to say, or somewhere in the region. And you see a dream house, somebody's dream house. Looks lovely, probably has a wonderful view. And then right next to it is this ridiculously skinny, completely emaciated second house. And it is tall, super thin, looks like it's almost impossible to live in. It looks almost more like a wall than a house. And it's built right next to it. And the story went, allegedly, there were two brothers that had some kind of dispute over the land. One brother, while the other one was preoccupied for some duration somehow, one brother decided, I'm going to build my dream house here and build it so large and occupy enough land that my other brother will have no choice but to sell. When he gets back, sees that the dream house is here, what else is he going to do? Psych. Second brother comes home, realizes, oh, you beat me to the punch with the dream house. I'm going to build a spite house. I'm going to build a house right next to yours just to block your view, just to upset you. And I'm going to live here, and you're going to have to know I'm living here just out of hatred and spite, living with this discomfort in this crazy skinny house. So I read this article, and I kind of did my own informal survey of just random people I would encounter as I would go to restaurants and go to stores. And, have you ever heard of a spite house? Most people say no. I was like, okay, I think I might be onto something. And if anybody in here is a writer, tried to write, you know how difficult it is to try to come up with something that you feel like, has anybody else done this already? And so then I thought maybe this might be something that nobody's really written about before. It turns out Edgar Allan Poe actually wrote a story about a spite house, but it's a comedy. It's not in any way a horror story. He wrote it as a joke because it is kind of, as you guys just, you guys all just kind of laughed at it. It is kind of a silly idea, and it is worthy of some ridicule and some humor. But I thought also, if you think about haunted houses, places with negative energy, that's the reason why they're haunted. I can't imagine a more worthy candidate of haunting than a spite house. There's got to be a lot of negative energy there if you literally just built it to spite somebody else as opposed to actually live properly in it. So, went and did my research, could not find another haunted house story set inside a spite house. Thought I might be onto something here. So I wrote The Spite House and kind of overshot what I had hoped to do. This is my debut novel. I'd been previously published in some magazines, short stories, as Nick indicated. But I had never completed a novel that I wanted to share with the world. This is not the first novel I ever wrote, but the first one I ever wrote, I was about 23, so about 20 years ago. And I was not happy with the finished product, even though I had family members that said, just try it, just send it out there. And I thought, I don't actually think this is good, and I don't want this to be what represents me, but now I know I could write this, so I'm going to just do it again. 20 years later, turns out it was not that easy. I would get about 30,000, 40,000 or so words into a book, which, for reference, 100,000 words or so is like kind of the midpoint of a novel. 80,000 is on the shorter end. So I'm getting somewhere between 30% and halfway through books, and then I would just have a crisis of confidence. This is no good, junk it, and start something new, because it's always, you have high energy when you start a fresh idea. You can, it's easy to be like, oh, the first, handful of first 10 chapters, I'm really onto something. And then, you reach a certain point, and I would just convince myself that this was not going to be any good. And so then I would just keep resetting like that, and I did that for about 20 years until I finally finished The Spite House. I mean, a little less than 20 years, I suppose. I finished The Spite House in early 2020. And so, in January of 2020. And so then it went on its journey of finding an agent, and Tor Nightfire picked it up. Like I said, it's doing much better. I shouldn't speak of it in the past tense. We're very much in the present with it now. I don't want you guys to leave here. Okay, on to the next thing. Although there's always new wonderful stuff coming out. There's new wonderful stuff that came out right alongside the Spite House here. If you're a big fan of horror, you got kind of a wealth of stories that got released at the same time as the Spite House. You had Stephen Graham Jones come out. You had Our Share of Night come out the same day. So yeah, a lot of wonderful stuff that was released simultaneously, and more to come. But as it pertains to the Spite House, you've got a good, I think very good, hopefully, haunted house story awaiting you here if you're interested and if you're picking it up. I had somebody ask me a question, so my next question I'm going to ask myself was a question I'm going to steal from a little old lady that I met in North Carolina, whose name I wish I could remember now. But I was at North Carolina at a book festival, and they had this cool event, kind of speed dating for authors. They'd sit you at a table, and it would be people from a book club, and it would be like 7 or 8 people or so. And you got 10 minutes to kind of pitch them on your story and also field some questions, and then they'd rotate us through a bunch of tables. It was fast-paced. It was amazing. I didn't realize 10 minutes went by that fast until they'd ring the bell every time, and we're in the middle of the conversation. It was phenomenal. And one of the ladies asked me, how horrible is the horror? Yeah, so she started off, how horrible, and I was worried, where's this going? How horrible are you as a writer? Or something like that. How horrible is the horror in your book? And I thought, that's a great question. I've never really heard it asked that way. But everybody has a different tolerance level, and everybody has a different thing that they're looking for, right? So I love Stephen Graham Jones. He wrote, he's written some very gnarly stuff. And Don't Fear the Reaper, sequel to My Heart is a Chainsaw, for instance. That's going to be, it's slasher-based. Slashers come with a certain amount of blood and guts. So, your kind of tolerance level going into something like that versus haunted house story. On the surface, you might think, well, that conveys one thing or another, but haunted house stories haunted house stories come in a lot of different flavors. So I like to think that I've hit this very difficult strike zone of a haunted house story that is going to encourage and entice people who are maybe not used to reading horror stories, while at the same time being very satisfying to people who are hardcore horror fans. And so far, some of the feedback I've gotten, I try to avoid any kind of reviews, positive or negative, because it just distracts me from it. And I don't begrudge anybody, obviously, their opinion on any of it. I can't read it. Otherwise, it'll just be in my head, even the positive stuff. Sometimes, especially the positive stuff, because then I'm like, do I need to repeat that? Do I need to keep trying to do that? Even if the next book I want to write isn't going to be even close to the same thing. So I try to avoid it. But one that snuck through my filter, a lady indicated that the book gave her a nightmare. And that's one of the ones I shared immediately to social media, because that was one of the first things I shared to social media when I saw that early review come in from one of the arcs that got released. Because that's basically what I've wanted to do ever since I was a kid and first got into horror fiction. Give somebody a nightmare. That is wild. I'm still fascinated by the idea that people are even reading my stories, much less being that captivated by it and getting in your head that much, because I read a lot of horror fiction, and I can't think of too many that have given me nightmares, although the ones that have really gotten under my skin. So I'm hoping, as well, that this will do that in a good way, but, as good as a nightmare can be, so to speak. So that's how horrible I think the horror is there. Might give you a nightmare, but at the same time, as I like to say, there's not a lot of inside parts that end up on the outside, so to speak, for people. Very little blood and guts. I always say that with a caveat. I have written some short fiction, as I mentioned, so if you're enticed by it because of this, and if you read it and you're entranced by maybe the mysterious elements that I'm going to talk about in a moment here, and you're like, oh, this is really good and a little bit more subtle and subdued than some of the horror I've heard about, and maybe I'll read more. Maybe Johnny's my safe space in horror, and I'll go check out his short fiction. I do have some other stuff where there's cannibalism and explicit descriptions and things involved, so tread carefully is all I'll say about that. I don't want to lure you into and you feel like you got trapped and then you got snagged by a false promise here. So that's the level of horror, the kind of temperature on the horror within the story, and where the genesis of the story came from as well, as far as what a spite house even is. I love this cover. And so the cover represents kind of the unusual architecture of the house. I mentioned previously skinny houses. The one in Pasadena is called a skinny house. My spite house is based on a different house called the Skinny House. Is based in Boston, and I just kind of transplanted it to the hill country, as well as some other architectural elements that I've stolen from other spite houses, because there are many of them around the nation and around the world. I would encourage you, if you're curious, if nothing else, go read up on them. They're fascinating just to see all the different ways that people have built a house, including some that I would say are leaning in a positive direction, kind of houses built to spite specifically bigotry. There's a famous house that is built kind of to confront a group of bigots, and not to bog down the conversation with any kind of unsavory discussion, because I find bigots impossibly boring and insufferable, which is why I don't really write about them too much. But I think that's awesome that a house like that exists out there, which, conveys that not all things that seem spiteful or angry are necessarily misdirected. There is a level of positive. We get angry for a reason, right? So there's a way to redirect that into a positive way. So that does exist. But for the most part, you'll read about spite houses and think these are really petty, mean-spirited individuals who actually build these and inhabit these. So those are some of the elements to the background and the story and kind of the general, like I said, temperature and the tenor of the story that I wanted to convey. As far as content in the story, it's about a father on the run with his daughters. We don't know why they're on the run. We're going to find out as the story progresses. So there's a mystery element there. The father's name is Eric. His daughters are Des and Stacy. Des is the older of the two. She is a young adult. There is a kind of it's not a YA novel, but it does have if there's somebody in your house who prefers YA, I do think that they would actually get something out of this as well, because Des is kind of the co-protagonist of the story along with Eric, and she gets almost as many chapters from her perspective as Eric gets from his. So I think that'll be very satisfying to people as well. He is driving with his daughters, like I said, on the run. We don't know why. He's a fugitive, but he is. He's heading back to Texas because that's where he has some history, trying to find answers related to the reason why he's on the run. He sees an ad in the newspaper for the Spite House, owned by a woman named Eunice, who is very wealthy and very powerful and kind of runs an entire town in the hill country. And she's also very terrified of the Spite House, and she wants to know, is it truly haunted? She will not set foot in it, even though she owns it. She just stays in her nice, much larger mansion. And so she's hiring somebody, and she's looking for someone, and she's kind of, as we find out early on in the novel, burned through, and has kind of gotten tired of hiring supposed experts and ghost hunters. And she wants somebody who she feels a real connection with, in terms of, I believe that they've actually encountered a ghost on a certain level that I can trust. And so she ends up hiring Eric, and he agrees to the job because she's going to pay him an exorbitant amount of money to prove that the house is haunted. And this is going to help him stop running, and also maybe help him find out some things that he is searching for, find some of the answers he's searching for. And so you have those mystery components combined with the unusual setting of a Spite House itself, the maybe lesser known Texas setting of the hill country. Just various factors that I think kind of converge into a pretty condensed package here. It's not an enormous novel by any stretch. Not that there's anything wrong with the larger novels. It's just the way this ended up coming together. I was able to keep it compact, but I think still bring the characters to life, make them feel all different and important, even some of the side characters. Inject some of the things that from childhood I've always wanted to reference in a ghost story, because I'm fascinated by these things. And just kind of bring it all together into this novel. So those are the components of the Spite House. If you guys don't mind, I'd like to read a little bit of it. Awesome. Gonna see if I can adjust the mic here without destroying anything. I'm actually super clumsy, so I don't want to Oh, there we go. Perfect. My first time I come to San Diego and I destroy a bookstore. I'm a big dude too, so when I do anything clumsy, it is a catastrophe. I got a buddy of mine. Since this is being recorded, I'll give him a shout out. My buddy Rudy. Shout out to Rudy back at home in San Diego. One time I was helping him move furniture, and I lost my footing, fell, and they waited for me to complete the descent of the fall before anybody got in the way because I'm huge and I'm flailing limbs. You might catch a stray. And later on, the way he described it, I'll never forget. He said, "You fall like an ogre." But it's true. I was thinking this is like a Lord of the Rings character, so one of the giants hurling boulders, and if I lost my footing, I'm tumbling down a mountain. Nobody would try to catch you. You might get flattened. So I was completely understand. So I always think of those things when I'm thinking of how clumsy. There's ways to be clumsy and be cute, like in a rom-com. If it's somebody small and diminutive, and I tripped and just only spilled my books. If I spill my books, it's going to be it's going to be like Godzilla stomped through the bookstore. So I'm always careful about those things and cognizant. So that's why I was very cautious about moving anything here. So for context, the scene I'm going to read here. Eunice, as I mentioned, she's kind of our owner of the house. Eric has already been in the house with his daughters. Some things have already occurred. There's some uncertainty about whether or not to stay, as I mentioned previously. The ghosts are not terribly shy. I do try to keep them in the shadows and keep things unnerving more so than aggressively terrifying, at least to begin with. I want you to read it and want to turn the lights on, and even after the lights are on, I want you to think about the things that are not being illuminated even with the lights on, and be worried about what's outside the window, etc. But having said that, the ghosts are very present, so something has already occurred. Eric is concerned about the safety of his daughters as well for himself, whether this is going to be worth it. So Eunice is telling him some backstory about the house that might seem counterintuitive, but what she wants him to do is get him to trust her more and say, okay, I'm now going to reveal things. And some people in town have already approached Eric with some of the secrets that Eunice has been keeping. So now she's going to confess even more to get him to understand, I'm going to be open with you. You can trust me. So please continue to stay in the house. So that's the context here as she describes a previous incident in the house in which, back when her father was in charge of the town more so than herself, a group of men tried to destroy a memorial, or deface a memorial in the town, and what her father did in response to this. So this, again, is Eunice speaking to Eric. Already at that time, the Spite House was thought to be haunted. Even people outside of Degner knew it. Degner is the name of the town, by the way, I apologize. Even people outside of Degner knew it. The rumor went beyond the house having ghosts. They said it would make you disappear if you went inside. How they came to that, I have no idea. Obviously, you've been in and out, so you know that much is a lie. But it was all fresh in everybody's minds because its owner died just a year earlier. The story going around was that after he'd been buried, some people saw him walking down the road, going back to his house, looking grim about it, like he didn't want to but had no choice. Eunice saw Eric stiffen at this, and then added, even I never believed that one, and I've known spirits are real for most of my life. Anyway, the men who came here to deface the monument were taken to the house and told they could either spend one night there or several at the jailhouse. But once they made their decision, they were stuck with it. They all made the mistake of choosing the Spite House. Not 2 hours went by before the first of them tried to come out. They didn't try to sneak out, not that you could. There's no way in or out but the front door or breaking through a window, I suppose. Either way, it would be obvious. Those men tried to walk out the front, right past the sheriffs and deputies and others parked outside. From what I've heard, after our folks raised their guns at them, it really looked for a moment like those men would rather be shot than forced back inside. They kept saying that they wouldn't go back, that the place was wrong, that they heard two children laughing and telling them that the house was going to eat them. She thought, but did not share. They apologized and begged to go to the jailhouse, as long as they didn't have to go back inside. It took the sheriff threatening to shoot their legs out and drag them in for them to go in on their own, crying the entire time. Those were all grown men. They ended up staying the whole night, and all of them came out in the morning. None of them disappeared after all. But later, after they got home, one of them, a man named Clyde, kept talking to his family and even his preacher about how he had to go back because he left something in the house. They didn't know what to make of it at first, and just told him it couldn't be that important. He still had his wedding ring, his father's watch, the most important things that he'd had on him at the time. What could he have left behind that could make him think he needed to go back? He couldn't tell them, or wouldn't. He just kept saying that he had to go, until one day his wife and children woke up, and couldn't find him in their house, and didn't see his truck out front. Since he talked about it so much, the Spite House was the first place they asked the authorities to look for him. Sure enough, his truck was parked right by it, but they searched that house, the valley, and everything nearby, and found no trace of him. People said all sorts of things to explain it away, even accusing some of our good citizens of killing him and stashing the body someplace where it would never be found. But I don't think anyone would have done that without my father's approval. And he might have okayed some intimidation. But he'd have had too much sense to greenlight a murder, especially since the message had already been sent. Still, it raised enough problems and questions that he and my mother decided to move the memorial onto private property to prevent something like this from happening again. My great-grandmother, Beatrice, commissioned the memorial in the first place, so it was ours to do with as we pleased. We brought it here, and now, a couple of generations later, it's become yet another Degner myth. Eric took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, then said, "Thanks for telling me all of that. I should have told you everything on day one. That way, when Emily brought it up, you could have said, 'Tell me something I don't know.' But better late than never, I suppose. As long as it's not too late. I hope it's not." She felt a flutter of fear as he hesitated. Then he said, "It's not. It doesn't change anything. I'm going back. I'm getting the job done. I'll earn your money, and then I'm getting my girls as far away from here as I can. That sounds like a solid plan." Thank you. So, again, some mysterious elements to it. Why is he still enticed by the idea, even though he senses a threat? Why does this particular story of someone who disappeared and seems to have believed they left something behind in the house, and what could they have even been talking about? All these things hopefully build some intrigue. These questions do get answered in the story. I do leave some things a little bit unexplained because I was always fascinated by the idea of the unexplained as a kid, and so I wanted to lean into that a little bit more as well, especially when it comes to ghosts. Horror fiction, I think, has leaned a little bit more so toward explaining things, and a lot of ghost stories have gone into the direction of explaining things, with ghost hunting becoming more popular and ghost hunting TV shows becoming more popular. When I was younger, I grew up remembering stuff like In Search Of, which is a little bit before my time, but Leonard Nimoy had a show called In Search Of, and Unsolved Mysteries, and these shows that they didn't really take a scientific kind of approach to it. They were just like, "Man, did you hear about it?" It was this idea of that house you're worried about, that story you heard about, that person who disappeared, this strange event. Did you hear about this? It's almost like the rumors that you tell yourselves, tell each other when you were kids. If you do this, you might find out about this ghost, right? The games we'd play, Rosemary's Baby, or not Rosemary's Baby, what is it? Blueberry Baby is what we had. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that, but you're supposed to look in a mirror, you pretend to be rocking a baby, a phantom baby would show up in your arms. You're supposed to, I think, chant Blueberry Baby in the mirror. Bloody Mary, in a similar vein. So many of these different things. And I wanted to channel a lot of that because that's the stuff that kept me awake at night, and it kept me captivated during the day. And I couldn't stop reading about it, and I couldn't get enough of it. So that's what I'm trying to to convey within this. So in addition to the mystery that has answers to it, I want you to leave with lingering questions of what it's like to be a ghost and the terror of not only seeing a ghost, but what it would be like to exist as a ghost and how that would feel and the horror that's intrinsic to that as well, which is something I was fortunate enough to be invited to write a piece for Crime Reads. And I was able to write about that because that's always something that's fascinated me as well. I think that covers everything I want to talk about for it. So I want to pitch it out to the group here. Thanks everybody for attending. Questions? Do you have any questions for me that I haven't asked myself? Yes, ma'am. Great question. Oh man, I do have nightmares. I'm going to say my favorite, the one that I think of as far as like kind of formative for me from when I was a kid, is related to Bloody Mary. And I haven't had it for years. I used to have this as recurring when I was a kid. I actually had it, something adjacent to it at least, I think about 3 or 4 years ago now, and I was like, oh, it kind of did feel like a favorite. Like as scary as it was, like when I woke up, I was like, oh man, it's almost like a friend you haven't seen in a while. Where have you been? I've seen you since I was a kid. So there was this kid I knew I grew up in Mississippi, Ocean Springs, down by the coast. It's a kid I knew named David. And David told me that Bloody Mary lived in this big house kind of near a restaurant. And we all knew this big old house. And Bloody Mary, he said, when she's not in the mirror, that's where she lives. So I would have nightmares, recurring nightmares of being trapped in that house and knowing she's somewhere in the house and I need to get out. And there's no way for me to get out. Every time I tried to find an exit, something would happen. The doors would, lead just down to another hallway, the door that I thought would get me out, etc. And I remember even going to the windows and I could see there was a picnic outside and my friends from school were all at this picnic and they couldn't see me. And I went to Catholic school of all places. And there was this priest that was flying for some reason. Dreams just have weird details. So there was this flying priest, which just made it eerier. It's like, why is the priest flying? Like, Monsignor Hannon's not supposed to be flying. So I would see that, and then I would finally get to the inner chamber where Bloody Mary was, and she would be sitting there, and she was very tall, and in the stories that we had about Bloody Mary, for whatever reason, our version of Bloody Mary down in Ocean Springs, at least at the school I was at, she was extremely tall and thin, and I've always been afraid of the tall, thin ghosts ever since then, with long fingers and everything, and so she was sitting in like this almost throne, like this giant chair. And she had like a veil over her face. She's dressed in all red. She has like a veil over her face. I come into the room, and then I would get to the point where she kind of raises her head in awareness that somebody's entered. And before she could look at me, that's when I'd wake up. And so that's my favorite nightmare. Even though when I was a kid, it was. I mean, I had a lamp by my bedside. Bloody Mary thing is, looking in the mirror. It had a semi-reflective surface. I could not turn toward my lamp at night. I would always face the other direction, which was toward the door of my room, which was like another scary feature, right? What's behind the door, what's down the hall. So there's no real safe place, but I refuse to look or face even the lamp, just in case. What if I talk in my sleep and I'm saying Bloody Mary? Does that count? I guess, I don't know if she's going to give me on a technicality. Who knows? So that's my favorite nightmare. Great question. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
How long ago? I hate sleeping anywhere near mirrors because if I look in them, what if there's something there that's
Yeah.
Unfortunately now I sleep facing a giant mirror by the door. I just close my eyes and I don't know. I will say that your book freaked me out.
Oh, you read it already?
I've read it already.
Oh, awesome.
Picked it up, really wanted to read it. I don't know when you're sleeping, you wake up in the middle of the night and you go to the bathroom, but you try to keep everything dark, you won't wake up. Oh, I normally go to the bathroom. And I'm getting ready to go to the bathroom, like, something about the book, say, just like this. I said, something in my head, I'm like, but the question I have is, obviously I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed what I would call, secondary kind of thing. Do you see yourself in the future writing these stories that explore some of these characters, unit that can be drafted again, kind of either backgrounds or
I've had some ideas. I I didn't want to write a sequel like immediately. I didn't want to kind of get into it. I don't see myself as a series writer, and I don't say that negatively at all. One of my old childhood friends who turns out to be an author from Ocean Springs, who reached out to me after the book came out, and he's like, "Hey man, I haven't seen you since we were like in 6th grade." I was like, "Oh my God, Scott!" He's a series writer, so and I respect the hell out of what he can do, and anybody else who does that. I just don't see myself having that capacity, so I didn't want to get locked into something like that. But I do have some ideas for the future, and they are burning kind of back here. That potentially somewhere down the road, catch up with some of these characters, catch up with Des. Catch up with, the aftermath of some of the folks that are impacted by the events in the story, even some of the more sidebar characters. I have a pretty far out idea for not quite a sequel, but a follow-up directly to the story that I think I would have to get further into my career and have a lot more. I would need publishers to have a lot more faith in me as an author to actually, I think, pitch it, because it's been done before, but I want to do it in a very specific way that I think is going to get some pushback. But maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? But I'm saving that for somewhere down the road. But I do have some ideas, and I would like to revisit this concept and maybe some of these characters as well down the road. And having read it, there is a prequel even I'd like to maybe write, because there's a patriarchal figure that plays a very important role. He was one of my favorite characters to write, and he's barely in the story, and he has a lot of impact for the limited time he's on the page, and I have a lot of ideas about him, and I really would love to explore that. So I might do something with him as a short story, or who knows what else down the road. Great question. Yes, sir.
Question from our virtual audience. Other than The Haunting of Hill House, what is your favorite haunted house story?
Great question. I really love, because of the way it plays with kind of time in addition to The Haunting, The Good House by Tananarive Due, who's also just one of my favorite authors and a huge inspiration for me. So I really love that. Also, one of my favorites from haunted house in particular, even though it's, when you get, I guess, down to the brass tacks of it, it's not necessarily, I don't know if it qualifies as a haunting, but Michael McDowell's The Elementals is absolutely one of my favorite books of all time, and just really eerie and really disturbing to me, just like subtle things, and again, there's a great moment in that book that's not even something that happens in the moment. It's somebody describing something that happened previously, and it just took me back to childhood, where the stories you would tell each other, and like, man, I heard that one time somebody saw, like, you're getting it third hand, almost like an urban legend. I heard that somebody saw X, Y, or Z through the window of some house when they were passing by. And there's a scene very similar to that is pretty brief, and almost probably for a lot of people just kind of maybe brushes by them. I've reread that the first time I read it, and I was like, this is so good. I can't believe how good it is. And the rest of it as well, phenomenal. So I love, just off the top, I love those. There's definitely trying to channel some of Burnt Offerings in this as well, with the idea of just the house is somewhat alive, and it has its own agenda as you go through the story, and the haunting has kind of infected the structure and the property itself. So those are all of my, I guess, inspirations on that. I don't know where to look when you're answering questions from online. I guess, like, I was just looking to the camera. Thanks for the question, person who asked it. Appreciate it. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Great question. Really suitable setting. I've had to be very careful about this answer, because I had a friend in Texas ask me, is this based on a specific town? And it's not based on any particular specific town, although there is a town that I started visiting more frequently than the others. And then I realized, I don't know if they're going to be happy with me saying it's based on that. Not that the town is painted as particularly loathsome or anything, but still. But the hill country, I'm just fascinated by it. I got to understand the area a little bit better, just kind of going through it. There's so much history there. It's so underexplored, I think, in fiction. So that's another component. Like I mentioned earlier, it's so hard to find something that you feel like that this hasn't really been, just really kind of run into the ground, so to speak, yet. Which, I say it's so hard, but at the same time, I actually think we're just not maybe looking in the right places, because the hill country's been there this whole time, and all these towns are, I think, ripe for ghost stories. You could write many more. My next book that I'm working on, I'm planning does have some. It takes place partly in the hill country, and features a specific location in the hill country that has a very macabre name that I can't wait to unleash on the world. So I'm finding out more and more of these things in these strange little areas and off the beaten path. You drive somewhere and there's a weird little cemetery or something, and you find out more and more of that story. So it's just, I feel like it's ripe for that. And in my experience, at least, I'm also fascinated by the idea. I think a lot of towns in the hill country kind of capture this unique vibe that I think you can probably find in a lot of different places throughout the world, and certainly throughout the United States, but for Texas in particular, of very welcoming, very friendly, but also kind of secretive in terms of, even for the tourism element, there's a vibe of, we're so happy you're here, we've got good wineries, tell a friend, but don't tell too many friends. Like, we kind of want this place to be like a best kept secret still, as opposed to the place that just blows up and explodes and becomes the new it thing for a while and gets burnt out. And that sense of maintaining a certain level of friendliness, but also we're going to, we want you to kind of keep it a secret a little bit. That element I wanted to capture. I feel like that fits with the story of a ghost and a haunting as well, really well. People want you to, you want to know about it, but people kind of want you to not know about it at the same time, and you're trying to find that balance. So that, among other things, it's just scenically speaking, just really beautiful and different, like I said, from what I think a lot of people think of. Texas is either the big cities or kind of West Texas, basically, which is, the drier, flatter land. I mean, it's an awesome setting for a lot of stories, but it's also, I think, probably been, it's overrepresented maybe as far as what Texas actually looks like. There's a lot of different geography in Texas, and I just felt like this is a really good area to explore. I'm not going to use this, but it has like one of the places relatively near my house is called the Devil's Backbone, and it's just a, ridge that you can drive on, and it's got all these supposed hauntings tied to it. You can go to the Devil's Backbone bar and find out a little more. You can read stories. There's a book written, I can't think of the author's name, so I apologize for that, but about hauntings in the hill country, and it's called the Devil's Backbone. And that's not the place that I'm going to unleash on the world, because that's, as good as that is, I mean, the one I've got is, I kind of want to, I think I might have to rename it, because it's very macabre and kind of gruesome, but, and the story tied to it is really unfortunate, but it just, I can't possibly let this opportunity slide, so I'm going to use that. So for those reasons and more, that's why I used the hill country. Thank you for asking. Yes, sir.
Another virtual question. Would you say the Winchester Mystery House is a spy house aimed to spy ghosts?
Interesting. Kind of more defensive, right? It's kind of more of a fortress to try to trick ghosts. It's like designed, well, that's the story behind it. And you read more articles. I've been fascinated by the Winchester Mystery House for a long time, and I've never went, but I'm fascinated by it. I've read some articles that indicate that maybe some of that is apocryphal, as far as it certainly is built very unusually. All the features are legitimate. Why exactly it was built that way, whether or not it's because Mrs. Winchester was worried that the ghosts that were all died at Winchester, at the hands of Winchester weapons, are actually going to come haunt her, and she's trying to trick them into not being able to find her. I've read that might not be exactly true, but it's always more fun to, print the legend, right? It's more fun to believe the legend. Not necessarily. I wouldn't call it a spite house, a spite ghost, but I could see how somebody could see it that way. I think of it just more of a, I'm so terrified of ghosts, I want to build basically a maze where they can't find me, and I always have a place where I can go and hide and dodge them. But it is. I mean, if you built that and you're thinking maybe the ghosts can even get lost in here, and they're always going to be able to search for me but never find me, and they're always just going to be eternally in a kind of a state of anger and frustration with being unable to reach me. There's even if you don't intend it to be, there's an element of spite there. I mean, that's an unfortunate state of existence, eternally wanting to seek revenge, and you can't find this person. You know they live here. I've got your address. I'm in your house. I'm already here. I'm supposed to be able to do the thing. I showed up. I did my part. Come out and fight me, and they're like, no. Get stuck in this hallway that goes to a stairway that goes nowhere, and then double back and see if you can find me then. I'll be long gone by then. So, great question. I love that. Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Man, great question. I do listen to music while I write. If there's I'm trying to think if there's any music that captures the atmosphere of this book, because when I write, I tend to write to just whatever movie soundtracks that I can kind of spin back. And so I know in my head what I'm thinking of when I'm reading the book personally is, but I don't know if it I don't think it necessarily captures the spirit of the book. In a way, it does, though. It's one of the last movies to give me a nightmare was It Follows, which has this incredible soundtrack. It's also a little bit psychedelic, more so I think than in a kind of throwback 70s vibe. So probably not what you would think of, more so traditionally from a haunted house perspective. But man, that's what I think of because that's what I wrote it to. And so I'm always thinking of that. And the idea of something stalking you and you can't see it, or you're paranoid about. I mean, now that I say that, the idea of something stalking you and you're paranoid about, is this the supernatural entity or not, definitely comes into play in the book, that kind of vibe. So that could definitely capture the spirit of the book, and that's the one that I can cycle through and remember in my head the most, being on repeat as I was writing it. And then, by the time I got to certain stages, I was moving on to some other tunes, but that's the soundtrack that I listen to the most with that. Great question. Yes, sir. I saw your hand raised too.
Yeah. Writing-wise, how was it transitioning from being a personal writer to a novel? Also, are you a pantser or a part?
Great questions. I'm more of a. I'll start from there. I'm more of a pantser. I kind of reverse. I go in reverse a little bit. I'll write from the seat of my pants for the most part, and then I'll do my outlines after I get to the editing phase. And that's when I want to make sure everything's in order so I can get my first draft done. Then I want to get an outline set up to, okay, I need to make sure these things match. This is what actually needs to not, make sure the continuity's right, etc. So when it comes to that and the rewrites, that's when I start kind of breaking it down and using my Microsoft Note and really breaking it down more so as far as that goes. I've relatively recently tried to do the outline thing because I do think it's more efficient for most people and probably more effective. Is if I had to make a recommendation, just anecdotally, I would, based on the people I know that do it, and I feel like they're more efficient probably than I am. I think it's plotting it and doing the outline is better. The way I am, I'll get stuck in an infinite loop of writing the outline and never actually get to the story if I do it that way. So I've just at a certain point, it's like, we just got to go. We just got to put it down on paper. We'll figure out the things we need to fix as we go along, and then at the end of it, we'll go back and fix things as needed. And then transitioning from short stories to longer form fiction, it wasn't super difficult for me. Because I'd always had the long fiction stories that I was aspiring to write and just never quite got there. So the hard part was getting over that hurdle, but the short fiction did help. It's good to be able to, for me it was at least, good to get the reminders that even though I'm not finding myself capable of finishing a novel for 20 years almost, I am able to write the end on some stories. And just seeing a finished product and knowing I took it, even if it's only 2,000 words, and some are a little bit longer, some are, in the 8,000 to 10,000 word range. Most of those end up getting trimmed to pieces, but just knowing that, okay, I can do that. For me, it actually helped with the transition, just because I was able to reinforce myself. Okay, I know that I'm capable of finishing the story. And it probably also, it probably shows up somewhat in the book. I have a big interest in any kind of story that kind of has a little short story within it, any novel that has a short story within it that's almost a throwaway. You almost don't need it. One of my favorite books, Joe Hill's Heart-Shaped Box. And within Heart-Shaped Box, there's a brief moment where the lead character, Judas Coyne, sees basically a mini ghost story play out that's mostly unrelated to the mission that he's on. And it's just kind of there to show you that ghosts exist, like beyond even what he's suffering through. It's kind of his own short story snuck into the larger novel, and I love it. And writing short stories also kind of helped me to embrace that element when I was writing this, the longer piece, and think, okay, where can I fit in a little short story here? And so what I read you guys, in a sense, is one of those moments. Can I fit this into the plot where I can also tell, my own version of a short story that took place there? Pet Cemetery, I think, has another great one with, when the son, the original idea of the son that came back from the war, and that's its own little short story within Pet Cemetery as well. And there's so many others that I really enjoy. And so I think those are the things that impacted me. And then, I guess it's hard for me to self-evaluate whether it was a hindrance or not. My editor might disagree with my assessment that it didn't hinder me and it helped me, but that's at least my take on its impact on me. Great question. Yes, sir.
All right, one more internet question. What is your favorite thing you found in your research into spy houses that didn't make it into your novel?
Oh, man. Favorite thing that didn't make it, man, I tried to, like I said, my story is actually an amalgam of several different spy houses, so I tried to fit in a few different things. There's a hallway that's built into the house that's stolen from a different spy house. The skinny nature of the house that's coming from a specific house. The background of the house is stolen from an entirely different house. I would say, I guess my favorite thing that didn't get into it is just how many there are. And when I originally kind of conceived of it, I was wondering, is there a way for me to point out that, not only point out, because I do have a reference to it, that there are many of these, but could we go to multiple spy houses? And I couldn't, there was no way I was going to be able to do that in the book without making a weird, road trip story. Basically, hey, we found out about this ghostly spy house. Want to go to another one? And just keep going on the road. But having said that out loud, I'm not convinced that wouldn't make for maybe a good a good horror story if you write it the right way. And that's probably, one of my favorite things researching them was how many there are, how different they are. They're all over the country. I'm finding out about new ones. And like I said, I didn't know about the one in Pasadena until last night. Just to me, it's fascinating that they've been around for so long and they're all over the place, and people are for the most part unaware of them. And when the gentleman mentioned it yesterday in Pasadena, we're surrounded by people in the audience who are all like, "Wait, what?" And sometimes they'll know the name, "Oh, the skinny house." So that's what that is. That's why it's built that way. So you might know the feature of the house that is built with an unusual architecture, but not be aware of why. So the fact that there are so many of them is really, I think, the thing that if I did write a book called Spite Houses instead of The Spite House and just called Spite Houses that's, I'm saying this now, who knows if this does well enough. I'm sure my editor will be like, "So I was watching your I was watching your event at Mysterious Galaxy, and what about Spite Houses? I know you said you didn't want to write a sequel, but this one's doing well enough that what about we do the road trip story?" And it is, like I said, when I first came up with it, is something that crossed my mind. That's why the different spite houses are all meshed into one, because I didn't want to just have one set house. I wanted to pull in pieces from all these other houses because I was fascinated by them all. So there's a lot more of them out there that I could get to for sure. Somebody else will probably beat me to the punch, but there's a lot more of them out there that people could definitely get to.
We got time for one more.
One more?
So when you were talking, I'm sorry, my voice is kind of hoarse. When you were talking about the nightmare, you had the recurring one with the Bloody Mary, but it was so arresting visually, just the way you described it, and so unique. Have you thought about developing that into a book or a story?
I do have an idea for a Bloody Mary book somewhere down the road, yes. And that those components of it, I've actually, that's one of the books that I've got about 30,000 words into and thought this is, so an example of the crisis of confidence thing that I mentioned, because I think it's important for people to, kind of maybe hear if you're aspiring and don't get in your own way. The common parlance in publishing, don't self-reject. I did a lot of self-rejecting. Let somebody else tell you no, don't tell yourself no. Because, I tell the story now I'm telling it to people, and people I've shared it with, they say, "Man, that sounds really interesting." And when I was trying to write it, I just thought, I'm the only person who thinks, I was convinced, I'm the only person who's going to think this is scary or interesting, because I've had this nightmare, so it's really personal to me. And then I read it, and I was like, anybody so Bloody Mary, I'm writing a Bloody Mary story where she haunts a house, she has her own house, and I'm trapped in the house, and that's where it's going to lead to, we go from the mirror part of it, and then I expanded it to this thing at the house. I'm like, does that even make sense? I'm telling myself, I'm the only person who's going to find this interesting because I've had this weird nightmare ever since I was a kid, and then now I'm getting the feedback when I share that. Man, that like you've just told me, and other people I've mentioned it to. Man, that actually sounds interesting. That could be its own story. But in my head, I was certain that I was completely off base, right? Like I'm writing a Bloody Mary story that at the end of the day is almost not even a Bloody Mary story, in the direction I'm going to take it. So I would like to go back and revisit it. I have right now 4-book master plan, and we'll see how that goes, right? The best laid plans. But it's not on there yet. But if I get through these 4 books, which nobody, my agent doesn't even know about that. But I've got it in my head, this transition I want to make from, I love writing horror, and that's my baby. I've got this crime story in my head as well that I want to write, but I don't think I can get there until book 4. Because I think I got to transition to it. And it's crime, but it's also horror. It's like pure crime, but very horror infused and horror influenced. And I just really want to be able to, and I've got some books in between that I really want to get to. And that's my 4-book plan to kind of transition to that. We'll see how it goes. But after that, then if I can pull that off, then I think I'll be in a place where anything goes, and I'll definitely brush off the old Bloody Mary manuscript and tune it up, fix it up, and hopefully the world will love it.
All right, everyone, I would like you to give a nice round of applause to Johnny. Johnny Compton, thank you so much. Congratulations on the Spy House, and I wish that many, many more nightmares are induced by your books. For everyone watching live, thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to go ahead and end it and begin the in-store signing. Don't forget, you can get your own copy of The Spy House signed while supplies last through Mysterious Galaxy. See ya!